This one has come.
Copy has come.
Yes. That's all. So the people have now gone to 29.
You did? Oh my. But we don't hear.
Why is it that we can't hear? If you hear that, there's another. Because it was slow. It's coming from there. I see people coming.
Prof, I think we can start.
All right. So did you couldn't get Mr.
Kofi Asar is on. We are just not getting the MP back.
Okay. Okay.
So we'll start without him. So Prof. Boa, I think you can start.
Okay. Good afternoon, listeners. This forum is an activity between the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences and then CDFM on the topic of reducing barriers to accessing education in Ghana. The Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences is proposing a widening of the public discussion to ensure that our educational system can be an important engine for driving the goal of SDG 4 in Ghana. The challenge facing us is that rights go with duties and responsibilities. Hence, whilst individuals press home for their rights to education, we must realize that systems that provide the right environment for accessing and benefiting from education are equally preserved. I have a singular honor, therefore, to introduce the moderator of this program, who is a broadcast journalist, a general manager at City FM, and a member of the governing council of the Global Marketing Network in Ghana. More of his initiatives enable him to launch a campaign on Galamsey and has received many awards in connection with his breakfast shows with Chartered Institute of Marketing Ghana, CIMG. He holds BA in economics with distinction from University of Ghana and MBA in marketing from Warwick Business School in UK. He won 2017 Journalist of the Year and 2018 Best Radio Show of the Ghana Journalists Association. He is in the person of Bernard Koku Able, who is the moderator of this program. I'm going next to introduce our chairman for this program. And the chairman is Emeritus Professor in the Department of Food Process Engineering, University of Ghana. He is our fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences and the president of Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. He's a fellow of International Academy of Food Science and Technology and a fellow of Kellogg Foundation Leadership Program. He has been chairman of many committees and has distinguished himself effectively. On this note, I call on Professor Emeritus Samuel Kofi Sefadede of University of Ghana to start the program. Thank you.
Chairman of the Education Chapter of the Academy, thank you for the introduction. Past Presidents of the Academy, Vice Presidents of the Academy, distinguished Fellows of the Academy, and distinguished panelists, City FM, City TV, and your esteemed listeners and viewers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. On behalf of the Council and Fellows of the Academy, I wish to thank the City FM and City TV managers and staff for this historic collaboration. You are all welcome to this special event. Let me reiterate that this forum will not discuss any matter that is currently before the courts. We will wait for the court processes to be completed, and if we must come back to the topic, the Academy will endeavor to do so. Our guiding principle is the SDG 4. That says that no one should be left behind when it comes to education. Whilst nations work towards this goal, it must be recognized that there are various barriers to accessing quality education. The forum will identify any layers of barriers in the form of economic, including mobilization of family resources for education, infrastructure, social and technology issues to enhance teaching, the impact of COVID-19 and the opportunities it brings for us to increase access to education, and key policy implications. The key players in this enterprise are the government, educational institutions, teachers, parents and guardians, students, and the systems that are put in place for the attainment of the SDG 4. I trust that our speakers this evening, in addressing their topics, will provide suggestions to reduce the barriers. We thank them for agreeing to speak at this forum, and we look forward to a very fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sefadede. And thank you very much, Professor Paul Bua Basua. Professor Paul is the chairman of the Education Chapter, and Professor Sifadede, as we know, emeritus, is the one chairing. So thank you, gentlemen, for the very kind words and for the very important context. Viewers and listeners, so our job today is quite simple: to identify the barriers to equitable, quality pre-tertiary education, to describe those barriers properly, and to suggest ways in which we can deal with those barriers so that the SDG Goal 4 is attained in Ghana. And Professor Sifadede's intro was very interesting because as a journalist, I remember that exactly a year ago today, April the 14th, was the last day of the 2-week lockdown, if anybody remembers. Lockdown was announced a couple of days to April and lasted for 2 weeks initially. What that lockdown did was to show us inequalities in our country. So whilst some people were sitting at home bonding, others didn't have food to eat. So the lockdown highlighted inequalities and gaps in society. Also in education, while some schools were doing Zoom lessons and kids were learning with their computers, some people were just sitting at home. So COVID exposed a lot of inequality, financial inequality, educational inequality. And I think it's very auspicious for the academy to choose a day like this to discuss this very important topic. We also know that the educational issue has been very strong, the Achimota school issue. And whilst Prof has advised us not to enter the merits of the case, I think it provides a very important context for the discussion about access to quality education. So we are minded by the court case, but we feel it's given us interesting entry points into looking at how to deal with access issues. Having said that, I just want to introduce quickly our speakers, then we'll jump straight in. We're privileged to have the Honorable Michael Insoa, a distinguished educationist and former Director General of the Ghana Education Service. He's been chairman of the Education Council since 2017. He's also a consultant on education. Honorable Insoa, thank you for joining us. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Bernard. You're welcome.
Great to have you. We're privileged also to have a renowned child and gender activist, country director of the International Child Development Program, icdp Ghana, established in 2012, and committed to promoting and protecting the dignity of children and to assist them to development, research, and advocacy. She's worked as a teacher in schools and colleges, both in Ghana and England, and she has over 25 years experience in teaching from nursery setting to high school. We're privileged to have Miss Joyce Lanyo. Please welcome her. Joyce, great to have you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And it's an honor to be part of this discussion.
Fantastic. We're also privileged to have the Executive Director of Africa Education Watch, an education policy research and advocacy organization working with civil society, government, and the private sector to achieve an equitable and accountable education system that assures quality and equal opportunity for all. He is also leading a team of consultants with 17 years of experience in the educational sector in Ghana, with expertise in designing, managing, and reviewing projects, policy research, etc. He's also chaired the Ghana National Education Campaign Coalition, represented civil society on the Ministerial Advocacy and Advisory Board, and Education Sector Working and Technical Committee. So we have Mr. Kofi Asare also on the panel. Kofi, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Bernard. Thanks for the opportunity and good evening to my co-panelists.
Last but not least is the Honorable Amankwa Esiama. He is a member of parliament for Fantiakwa North in the Eastern region and is the chairman of the Select Committee on Education in the 8th Parliament. Honorable, if you are there, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Okay, while we wait for him to join, let me just run through quickly the program. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to articulate their view on the subject of reducing barriers to access to education in Ghana, after which I will ask a few questions. We will then open the floor for contributions from all who have joined both fellows and ordinary members. The forum contributions can take two forms. Those of you who are connected via Zoom can let us know based on giving a wave in the chat that you want to contribute, and we'll call you to contribute. But to also save time, we would ask that you put your comments in the chat box so that we can read them out. If there are specific questions as well, we will direct them to the speakers. So if you want to contribute and you can't speak vocally or verbally, as in we can't hear you, you can send your comments via the chat. Thank you all for understanding. Let me start with Mr. Nsoa, because you are bringing both practical and theoretical insight into the discussion. You've run education in Ghana, you've taught, you are advising in policy. So you almost have a 360 view of education. What are your opening comments on the subject of reducing barriers to access to education in Ghana? You have 10 minutes. Please take it up.
Thank you, Bernard. And Bernard, because of the nature, the time constraint and so on, maybe I'll take the angle from what has been done in this country to reduce barriers to education, so that some historical perspectives, so that we know why we are where we are now. Ghana takes this mandate from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And when Ghana became a self-governing country, we joined the United Nations. And of course, we were bound by this declaration that everyone has the right to education, and education shall be free in the elementary and fundamental stages. And elementary education shall be compulsory. I think the key word is compulsory, because when you say compulsory, it means everybody needs to have access to the education that the country is providing. Now, in Ghana, basic education became compulsory by the Compulsory Education Act of 1961. And by this act, it's stated in the act that every child who has attained the age of school-going age, as determined by the minister, shall attend a course of instruction as laid down by the minister in a school recognized for the purpose by the minister. And two, any parent, because it's compulsory, any parent who fails to comply with this provision shall be liable to conviction. Now, if you say it's compulsory and people cannot pay for the services, and therefore they are liable to be sent to court and convicted, then it creates a problem, because if the parents are poor and they cannot afford the textbooks, even the tuition fee, those days when the law was passed, tuition fee or school fees were charged, and people who supposedly could not afford were not supposed could not go to school. Now, because of this situation, in 1963, the act was passed in 1961. In 1963, the government tried to cushion the hardships of parents. Supply of textbooks also became free. School fees were abolished in 1960, and this was followed by a free textbook scheme. So this, in some way, helped many parents to send their children to school. But if you look at the social aspect, children will have to be prepared to go to school. They will have to buy uniforms. They will have to buy textbooks. sorry, not textbook, but other things that the school required. Now, this continued until 1996, when the free compulsory universal basic education was introduced. Now, in this program, there was a cost-sharing arrangement between parents and the government. Government was to provide free tuition, free textbooks, provision of equipment, and so on. And then parents were to provide stationery, meals, transportation, and uniforms. Now, let me go back to the social aspect of from parents. Meals, transportation, and uniform also created a problem for barriers for children not to go to school, because not all parents could afford buying the stationery, the providing meals or money for meals, transportation, and of course, uniform. So this was the situation. And therefore, there were still barriers, because if you couldn't afford providing meals and transportation and uniform, definitely then you could not access the free schooling. Out of this came the FQ document, as I said, and it was meant to help parents. However, in the document itself, it shot itself in the foot, trying to help poor parents to send their children to school. There was a provision in the document that subject district assembly, communities and PTAs may impose special levies on their members. Of course, it said on their members for the purposes of raising funds to help provide school projects. And this created so much problem that at a point, this had to be changed, because a survey by GS in 2004 revealed that there were as many as 120 different levies, including broom levies. So it created a situation where, again, these levies, which is approved, still put many of the children outside the school. Now, as a result, the ministry or the nation came out with a support scheme, popularly known as the Capitation Grant. Capitation Grant, which abolished all the levies, but reduced the fees that children will have to pay in school. And the government decided to take responsibility for providing these fees. And that's the Capitation Grant, which was to cater for minor repairs in schools, providing teaching and learning materials for teachers to be able to teach. And this Capitation Grant is still in existence. However, we still have cases of schools collecting fees under the guise of PTA fees. So now PTAs are voluntary organizations to support the school. However, it has become some sort of compulsory PTA dues, so that when children can't pay or their parents can't pay, it creates a barrier for many of them. And this is still raging. The discussions are still ongoing, and we hope we'll be able to overcome this, because recently, many of the secondary schools had this issue that in fact, schools were collecting as if they were doing register calling every morning. and that started affecting enrollment in our schools. The capitation grant was actually, there was a survey by GES in a school in Pasa, in the now OT region, where the number of children in the village were more than 150 for that small school, but only 48 were in the school. When an NGO decided to take over the responsibility of these fees, small fees, the enrollment rose to 100%, 96, from 48 to 96. And that is where the capitation gave credence to the capitation grant for the government to support this. We are still not out of the root because the enrollment, gross enrollment, and shows that we are still not there because about 10% of children are still not in school. So,
You should be wrapping up. You should be wrapping up because your 10 minutes are.
So if you look at that, you ask yourself, so where are these children and what are some of the reasons for this? One, government introduced the school feeding program in order to help children who don't have or whose parents cannot afford 3 square meals a day. And then government also introduced the school uniforms. All these are meant to remove barriers from parents who cannot afford supplying or providing uniform, but 2 or 3 uniforms in a year. Certainly, if the uniform is made and is used for only school, they will have to find other uniforms for them to attend church services and other functions. And this is, for some parents, very difficult to. So all these schemes were done just to help reduce barriers from school. But as I said, we are not there yet, but I will leave it here.
Thank you so much. And so I think that's been a fantastic background for everybody. It's like a baseline from 1961 through 63 to F cube, to cost sharing, to capitation grant, and where we are. I think it's very good. We'll have some questions for you later. Thank you very much. This is the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences Public Forum on Access to Education, brought to you in partnership with City FM and City TV. We're streaming live on Facebook and on Zoom. And we just heard from our first speaker. I'm happy to announce that the chairman of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Education, Honorable Amankwe Siama, has joined us. So even though he's not the second speaker, I just want to say hello to him so you know he's here. So Honorable Amankwe, if you can hear me, kindly put on your mic and say hello so they know that you are in the flesh. Good afternoon.
Hello, Bernard. Hello, Bernard.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Bernard. Pleased to be with you, joining you here this afternoon.
Fantastic. We're happy to have you. We'll take your comments shortly. I want to move to the chair of the CSO platform and SDG, because after the foundation in SOA has laid, I feel that because you've taught for so many years and because of the work you do in civil society, and also because you are almost like the main watchdog for the SDG, you can articulate some of the remaining gaps. He's already explained how some of the gaps have been addressed, but can you throw more light on the subject of what barriers we have to access in education in Ghana? This is basic and secondary, and how serious these barriers are. Ms. Joyce Lanyo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And I'll be grateful if I am allowed to share my screen. Otherwise, I'll go straight on.
Yes, you're allowed to share your screen.
Okay. All right, so the host disabled participant screen sharing. I don't know whether.
You shortly, so as you start talking,
okay, all right, that's fine. I would like to seize this opportunity to thank the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences for this wonderful opportunity to be a speaker in this forum. Indeed, education is my heartbeat, and I'm always eager and interested to know whatever is happening here. I want to take it at the level of the girl-child education, since we're talking about the barriers of education, the barriers that hinder the access to education. I also want to acknowledge UNESCO and UNICEF for some of the research materials that they had published, and I'm grateful to them. I also want to acknowledge.
You can share your screen now.
Oh, okay.
So try that whilst you do the acknowledgement.
And wow, and so
you are acknowledging UNESCO and others.
Yeah, and then all the research names that I used to come out with this presentation. I think it's a bit late now, so I'll go on straight to present. Mr. Nsowa has spoken about the foundations that established this whole education ministry or education of all our children in the country. And so I'm not going to go there. I'm also not going to go into the issues around the education being considered as a human right, and all the protocols that we have ascribed to signatures that has been ascribed to some of these frameworks, international frameworks, not forgetting about the Constitution and all that. Now, I will go straight into the efforts that GS has made to make sure that every child has the full cycle of education by promoting universal access, retention, and completion. There are they have made other efforts in terms of protection of all vulnerable and marginalized children who are likely to lose out on education as a priority concern. And some of the issues Mr. Nsowa has spoken about it. Now, I want to go straight into the issue of COVID and the matters are arising in relation to girls' education in the country. The data that we have shows how our girls during the COVID were pregnant, and so when the school reopened, they just could not come back. And this is an issue we have been discussing and talking about. And indeed, sometimes I wonder whether we are trying to achieve the leave no one behind thing that we always talk about. So the data is very clear about how these girls have become pregnant during COVID. GES has taken a lot of steps to minimize this pregnancy at the pre-tertiary level. And so if a girl gets pregnant, are there any opportunities for reintegration? That's the question we are asking. So if you go back to the education concept as a human right in relation to economic, social, and political benefits, gender equality is key in some of these features and is articulated in the SDG 4 and then the SDG 5. The SDG 4 talking about ensuring equitable and inclusive quality education and promoting lifelong education for all. And then Goal 5, SDG 5, it talked about empowering all girls and women to achieve gender equality. So where are we in terms of our efforts to achieve SDG, which is so close in a matter of 10 years, 9 years, we will almost be there to give an account of our efforts. So we have considered the issues around the girl child education and access to school. Recently, schoolgirls' pregnancy has been found to be a major factor preventing GS from reaching its goals. GS has also tried to take a lot of steps to minimize pregnancy in pre-tertiary schools. So if a girl, however, gets pregnant, there are opportunities for reintegration after school that we need to speak about and do advocacy on. Early child education is a significant contributory factor to economic development and a key to sustainable development. In this era of globalization, the education of the girl child is considered a strategic investment in human rights and intellectual capital. And that's why UNESCO, in its document 1993, alluded to the fact that women illiteracy continues to be high due to our country's inability to enroll and retain girls in school. So the question is, how are we going about retaining our girls? Girls' education offers hope for breaking the cycle of feminized deprivation and poverty. Increased schooling has similar effects on male and female incomes, but girls' education generates much larger social benefits. So some is attributed to the fact that incomes and leverage afforded and knowledge and awareness on the girl child cannot be overemphasized. So we are looking at some of the barriers that actually affect our girls at our pre-tertiary levels. And the first is the issue about poverty. Mr. Nsova spoke about certain social interventions that the government sought to bring to minimize the impact of poverty on education. We are also looking at certain negative social and cultural norms, poor parental attitudes to girls' education. You know, you all agree with me. If there's this boy and this girl, especially in a rural setting, the opportunity will be given to the boy because we have our rules that is certain by way of tradition and social norms to take care of the home. There are also not enough female role models to prove to our girls that it can be done. It is possible. And then certain inimical traditional and cultural beliefs and traditional gender roles standing in the way of the Ghanaian females' access to education. The absence of changing rooms in schools, talking about the special factors in relation to the distance from the home to the school. Now, gender inequality in Ghana's education sector, as already said, can be looked at from that spatial direction. So that if the school is far, rough, how can the girl access it? In times of maybe period, menstruations and all that, coming to school and not having the appropriate structures to change in case there is an issue of changing the girls' issues around the menstrual challenges, it becomes a problem. Now, if you look at the urban centers, there is a narrower gap between boys and girls in terms of those who can attain higher levels of education compared to rural areas. Girls residing in these rural locations are more likely to be married off at early age compared to their counterparts in the urban areas. Our cultural values that cherish childbirth puts pressure on the girl to prioritize childbirth at the detriment of their education. Now, poverty. Due to poverty, rural parents usually pressure their daughters to marry early to relieve them of the financial burdens. Some of the issues include the rate of teenage pregnancy and early motherhood in rural areas, which surpasses the urban areas because of the low family planning patronage.
You have 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes, so you should be getting to conclusion.
So we are encouraging that the Ghanaian parents should invest and spend quality time on their sons and girls' education, as against the thinking that the boys' education should be much more prioritized and high-paying in relation to jobs than the female. It is, however, important that the Ghanaian parents change their stereotypical notions that girls from households where there is income inequality in favor of men will earn less income from education. And worthy of note is that if given an equal opportunity, girls from such homes can outperform their male counterparts in the pursuit of higher levels of education that can consequently eliminate the gender gap in wages on the Ghanaian labor market. So we recommend that concerning issues of this girls' pregnancy, there should be promotion of abstinence among school girls and boys. Awareness should be created on sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy in schools. Capacity building for girl-child coordinators on pregnancy and re-entry guidelines should also be something the GAs should look at. Strengthening the girls' education units, increase capitation grants, incentive and scholarship schemes for brilliant but needy girls. GES, in collaboration with development partners, should support with advocacy actions on the re-entry policy for young mothers that has been designed by UNICEF. And also, we propose that there should be revamping and retooling of the guidance and counseling unit in schools so that girls can receive constant guidance on how they can lead their lives to be able to complete schools. PTA, SMCs, traditional leaders, community members should also support in these advocacy actions. Teachers, teacher unions, key stakeholders should also be part, including the media. So to end it all, my emphasis is what COVID-19 has brought and the matters arising on school girls' education and issues around pregnancy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Joyce Lanyo. We couldn't see your screen, but your presentation was very graphic. So we've heard everything you've said. You've laid on the foundation, Honorable Director, former Director has laid by giving us the gender, the income, and the spatial dimensions to these barriers. So far, so good. We want to say to those who are viewing us that if you want to contribute to this public forum, there are two ways. You can raise your hand on the screen based on the icon. We will know and give you a chance to talk later. Or you can put your question or comment in the chat box and the team will let us know and we'll read it. We want to continue by bringing in Kofi Asare from Africa Education Watch to delve deeper into some of these barriers as well. Because I noticed that I rushed Joyce, so she couldn't delve into some of the things she wanted to delve into. But that's why we have Kofi also on the panel. So Kofi, if you can go further beyond what Joyce has done and add a few more layers, and then we bring in the MP to hide the loose ends for us. So Kofi Asare is our next speaker. Kofi, you have the floor. Again, please allow him to share his screen. Yes, you can see your screen.
All right. Thank you, Bernard. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you once again. My regards to everybody. My presentation is in three parts: access barriers at the basic level, at the secondary level, and at the tertiary level. Let me begin by citing that I'm citing the Ministry of Education as my source of data in the sector's performance reports and the NMS data. At the basic level, I want to touch on physical architecture of our educational infrastructure system as a major impediment of access. We have a basic education system within the public sector, which has 355 nurseries. I know nurseries are not part of the formal education system, but it's a critical aspect of the preparatory stage for basic education. So I'll bring in nurseries. We have 355 nurseries, public nurseries, feeding into 14,821 kindergartens and then 15,291 primary schools, and 11,131 junior high schools. What you find is that if you look at the structure carefully, you realize that there are 14,821 kindergartens without nurseries. That's about 98% of kindergartens, public kindergartens, do not have nurseries. If you move forward, you realize that there are 470 primary schools without kindergartens. That's 3% of primary schools without kindergartens. And most importantly, and very, very much consequential to the issue of access barriers, there are 4,160 junior high schools without, 4,160 primary schools without junior high schools. 27% of our primary schools do not have junior high schools. It means that if I am a student in Asamoah Krom in the Wasam Menfi district, and I complete school in that primary school, I may not have a junior high school in my community. And the likelihood of me commuting up to 10 kilometers to the next junior high school constitutes a major barrier to a major physical access barrier in basic education. So the incongruity between the number of nurseries, 355, kindergartens, junior high schools, and primary schools means that as we progress, opportunities for progression and retention is limited, especially between primary 6 and junior high school 1, where 4,160 primary schools do not have junior high schools. And that is about 27%. That's at 2019. This is a basic education picture. I move to the secondary education. Now, before I end the basic education, one other major impediment to access is the issue of schools under trees. There are thousands of schools under trees in this country. We see them every day. And immediately schools take place under such environment, you expect that, you know, the zeal to enroll children is actually affected, and it leads to either dropout or non-enrollment, being a physical access barrier. Move to secondary education. We have the free senior high school, which is doing pretty well, targeting to ensure that every child who enrolls in primary school and ends up enrolling in senior high school, consistent with SDG4. Now, the challenge is that we are into the fourth year of its implementation. The most recent data we have is in 2019. But if you look at the table I'm sharing now, between 2017 and 2019, you find that every year there is a minimum of 11% of students who are placed, but they do not honor their admissions. They do not enroll, but they are placed. I'm not talking about those who did not pass the BEC to merit a placement, or those who did not qualify to merit a placement, but those who are placed but do not enroll. In 2019, 14.5%, that's about 68,000, were placed in a free senior high school program, but they did not enroll. Now, I know that some of them may have gone to private schools, but let's look at some of the possible scenarios here. There's a major financial barrier within the secondary education system. Don't forget that the program was designed for the poorest of the poor. When the president launched it at WAS, he said that this is to ensure that the poorest of the poor will never have a reason not to go to school on grounds of finance. Presently, we know that the poorest of the poor are those who live in rural areas who score very, very bad grades. I mean, who score the worst grades relatively in a BEC. If you attain a grade 30 and above, it's likely you will not get any of your first 5 choices. Immediately that happens, you are going for self-placement. This year, by day 2 of self-placement, all boarding schools were completed. All boarding schools were choked. There were only days to schools available. So students had to choose schools outside their district if they wanted to enroll. And this has promoted the concept of day without hostel, DWH, day without hostel. And so in this case, the majority of the self-placement students will choose schools that are day schools outside their district, because those are the available schools. In Maurice Senior High Technical School, for instance, you find that students in that school are renting a hostel. The students in that school come from rural districts like Asen North, Isikumodobe Mbrakwa, Komenda, Edinegwafo, and then Asen South. Some come as far as even Elembele and then Nzima East, but majority of them are from the rural Central District. When they get self-placement to Maurice Senior High School, they have to go and pay 2,600 cedis for a hostel. It includes the electricity and feeding before they can access free senior high school as day students, day without hostel. Now, the government subvention on a free senior high school is actually 2,060 Ghana cedis a year. The cost of the accommodation and feeding alone they pay to the hostel is 2,600. So they are paying more than government is paying to access what we call free. But these are the poorest of the poor that the policy was actually targeting. So relatively, advantaged students will be enjoying boarding education free, and then this the poorest of the poor will be going through this. If very poor people fall in this category, they are not likely to enroll. So this year, we engaged a lot of people who did not enroll, including one boy who attended Bone Senior Primary School in Baweria, because the father was a domestic staff in a particular school and couldn't afford, and so the guy is still there. All right. Move to tertiary. Major financial barrier and access barrier is financing tertiary. Government has set a target of an increasing tertiary gross enrollment from the current 18% to 40% by 2030, which is fantastic. However, this is within a tertiary financing scheme where the student loan arrives at the end of the academic year, at best at the end of the first semester. As we speak, the Student Loan Trust Fund have set tomorrow as deadline for paying all student loan arrears for the last academic year. So those who attained admission this year, in November and December, and then January, generally these students, how did they manage to get money to enroll? It tells you that many people could not enroll because they did not have, the student wasn't available at the beginning of the term where it matters most. These three are the major access barriers to basic secondary and secondary education. Recommendations. 1, we recommend that GOG must increase the allocation from the GET fund that feeds into the Student Loan Trust Fund. The law says that, the GET fund law says that up to 10% should be allocated to the Student Loan Trust Fund, up to 10%. Because of that, you find that in many years, Parliament will only approve 1.5% because it said up to 10%. There's only a ceiling, there's no minimum threshold. We believe that if the minimum threshold is set in the law and capped at 5%, it will ensure that there's adequate funding for the Student Loan Trust Fund. Bearing in mind that government is about to introduce a guarantor-free or a guarantor-less student loan scheme, which will require that we need more money. Second, the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, that is the combination of National Accreditation Board and National Council for Tertiary Education, will have to engage the tertiary institutions on a loan credit scheme, where students, once they obtain the admission forms, can fill the SLT application form and then apply for their school fees against the loan. So that once you have an admission form and you fill the student trust form immediately, you can use that to confirm your admission without necessarily paying cash. When the student loan is ready, the school will retrieve the cash. We know universities may have to take bank overdrafts to finance it because many students will take advantage of it. But I think students should be comfortable even if they are sharing the cost of the overdraft to the university, because in this case, we are not excluding students who cannot pay, but they are using their loan as their collateral. The last recommendation, the third recommendation is that we need to invest in rural education infrastructure. In the past 4 years, we've done extensive focus on senior school infrastructure to the detriment of basic school infrastructure. So let's invest more in basic education infrastructure. But most importantly, let's remodel what we call primary school. Can we have a system where instead of building primary school in community A and building junior school in community B, have a system where we have a basic school concept where every school every school has KG, primary and junior high school integrated, called a basic school, so that we don't have a situation where we are building primary schools to come back after 4 years and cry that there are no junior high schools in such communities. We can. Other countries have done that. And then finally, the Ministry of Education, on the senior high schools, we have 3 options. Option 1 is that either we modernize senior high school education entirely and make day education as a matter of choice. Or 2, we switch to an entirely community day concept with boarding as a paid choice. Or C, we absorb the accommodation cost of all day with hostel students while maintaining the status quo to ensure that the poorest of the poor who are victims of this day with hostel students wouldn't have to be excluded or financially constrained from accessing secondary education. Thank you very much, Bernard, and thank you very much, the panelists and participants.
Thank you very much, Kofi. That was a lot in 10 minutes. You are a very judicious user of time. We appreciate this. Two big issues jump at me. I'll ask questions on later. The poorest of the poor have to pay to access free education. That is a paradox. And then the parliament needing to set a minimum threshold for the contribution to the GET fund. Very good foundation for us to bring
the Student Loan Trust Fund.
MP and chairman of the committee. So like you set it up for him nicely. So Honorable Isiama, thank you for joining us. You are the chair of this very powerful committee. For you, we've had enough problems. So you sit in a very interesting place. You are obviously an educationist and also an MP. You've had at least 2 presentations on some of the problems, gender gaps, financial gaps. So I think you should focus a bit more on what Parliament is doing and can do to help the executive to bridge the gap and also to ensure the executive does the right thing. So those are the 2 things. What can Parliament do and what is Parliament doing to help bridge these gaps in education that have been identified so eloquently by our 3 speakers? And how can you help the executive to do their job properly? So Honorable Amankwesiama, you have the floor. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Bernard, for giving me the opportunity to join you on this program. And I would like to say that Parliament has done a lot to improve the access and quality of education in Ghana. Several protocols, treaties, and conventions aimed at improving access to the quality of education at all levels has been introduced and passed in Parliament. Consider the 1961 Act 87, that dealt with free universal primary education. The Education Trust Fund, that's GET Fund, the big one that has changed a lot in providing infrastructure for the country's education system. The Children's Act 1998 and the Ghana Education Service Act 1995, Act 506. The Education Act 2008, Act 778, and the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, 1989. We have also passed the Education for All Act, which is now in operation. The Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, and the Sustainable Development Goals have all been here with us through Parliament. A lot has been done by parliamentarians to make sure that our constituents, for that matter, get access to education unhindered. I would like to concentrate here on the inadequate number of trained and well-motivated teachers, which we have as a committee been hammering on the ministry to make sure that those, especially in the deprived areas of Ghana, obtained the right qualified, trained teachers to handle. There are so many teachers in Accra or in the urban areas that they don't even know what to do, to be specific, whereas there is a total lack of trained teachers in our villages. When you come to Fantiakwa, my constituency, for instance, there are several villages that do not have trained teachers, which is a border and has been a border by myself and the district education office. it boils down to where these teachers will stay in the villages. There are no infrastructure in the villages where the teachers can access and live in there. There was a guy who was sent to a village called Anyiboy in my constituency, and he came back to the district and told the district director that it is indeed not a privilege to be with them, but it was very hazardous for him to be in that village because he has never slept in a mud room or a mud house before. Can you imagine this? So the boy or the gentleman couldn't stay in the village. He said if he would be sacked out after being trained by government, he would go out. These are some of the difficulties that some of these teachers do encounter when they go to the villages. It is very sad and very pathetic. I said it with a heavy heart that we don't have enough, despite the investment in education. Government invests about 12 to 15% of GDP in every budget cycle into education, but it's woefully inadequate to make sure that we meet the requirement of education in our rural areas. It is a border, and we have to train more teachers. That will also cost the government a lot of money, but still we have to do it because we have no option if you want equal education and quality education for all. I have said that not until the teacher is well motivated and given his place in our economic in our economic system, we will always continue to suspect the academic purity of our children. And it is indeed the right thing to say. Teachers are suffering, but they need also to accept the fact that it is not teaching in the urban areas alone that we made them to go to the training colleges where they are being given allowances. It is difficult for some people to live in the villages, but yet still they need, the administration of GES need to make sure that we train specific people or specific teachers who would accept to go to the villages. We must be spot on. And that is where the district assemblies should come in. We should make sure that the district sponsor teachers to training colleges for them to accept to go to these villages to teach. And that should be people who hail from these or are denizens of these areas, so that it will not be difficult for them to stay with them because they came out of them to be trained as teachers and to go back to them and handle the children in these areas. It is pathetic, Ben, to go to a village to see that the classrooms are there, government has built the classrooms, but there are no teachers in these classrooms. Absenteeism is another area that the GES must consider, and which Parliament, and for that matter, my committee, is hammering on to make sure that supervision becomes the order of the day as it used to be. So that when these teachers are supervised well, then we will make sure that they will go to the schools and not leave the classrooms. It is important that teachers stay in the classroom once they have accepted that they will teach in these rural areas. It is not at all a pleasant situation where a whole school in a rural setup can have a 0 BC situation. It is not the best. And we abhor that as members of parliament. If it comes from your constituency, it is very difficult to accept it. And it's a shame, actually. But there is nothing that an MP could do, except that we could make the laws, but implementing of the laws does not lie in our bosom. So the GES must make sure that they train specific people for specific areas. Targeting should be the order of the day, so that these teachers can comfortably teach and teach well the children from their home areas. I think that will solve a lot of problems. And again, government must do a lot in providing infrastructure. Some of the village schools are an eyesore, and it makes it difficult for even teachers to accept posting to some of these schools. Again, we should have a law that there is a law there, but I don't think it is being implemented well, where every small village would have to provide a school for itself and demand teachers to be there. See, when you go to our constituencies, you can have a small village with about 50 houses, but with so many children, over 100, and they will be demanding for a school, especially KGs. Give us KG, give us KG. After the KG, they demand 6 classroom block, and it's a toll on the financing of education in Ghana. We should also look into that aspect of financing education in Ghana. That is another area. Infrastructure is very, very important. And in some areas too, I can confidently say that teachers are inadequate in supply. And government should endeavor to pump in more money so that the training colleges can sort of admit more candidates to train as teachers to man, especially our rural areas. I would also like to suggest that another debilitating factor is where there are so many teachers in the urban areas. So the administrative policies of the GES must be that these teachers must be pushed down into the rural areas and make sure that they do justice to teaching in the rural areas. Finally, I would like to say that the teacher must be well motivated. The rural teachers, especially people who accept posting to rural areas, must be compensated for being there to teach in the rural areas. That will also be another motivating factor that we can entice teachers to go back to the rural areas and teach as teachers to improve the educational standard of our people who live in the rural areas. Without that, then the country is not complete as far as education for all is concerned. We cannot have education for some of our children in the urban areas and a substandard education for those who live in the rural areas because of the fact that they don't have teachers, well-trained teachers who can handle them in the rural areas. It is something that we should all be able to consider. And the committee in Parliament, as far as education is concerned, what I chair, has made several attempts to meet the entirety of the ministry to pin them down and ask for such opportunities to train teachers to the rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. We appreciate your presentation because there are so many teachers on the forum, and none of the earlier speakers emphasized the teacher. So I'm sure the teachers are very happy and they'll say 4 more for Esiama. As chairman of the committee. So thank you for bringing the teaching dimension. But there was a question I thought you would address, because the previous speaker said that for some reason, the allocation for GET fund, the only a maximum threshold is given. And it's as if the law doesn't insist on the minimum threshold from the, I think what is a consolidated fund.
No, the allocation from GET fund to the student loan trust fund.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. The law says a maximum of 10%. And so over time, Get Fund always releases maximum 2% to the Student Loan Trust Fund.
And MP, Chairman of Education Committee, what can your committee do? Can you come up with a law to give a minimum threshold of what Get Fund should pay? Because they seem to be paying 1.5%, sometimes 2%. So they are not.
No, we don't have to bring out a law. The law is already in existence. What we need to do now is to make sure that they act to the letter of the law and make sure that the 10% is allocated to the student loan fund. That is all we have to do. So once I'm known to this, I will make sure that I write to the minister and for him to explain and make sure that the 10% is made available to the fund.
Well, Kofi, I think you need to explain because
Honorable, the provision in the law says that a maximum of 10%, of the fund should support the Student Loan Trust Fund. It's a maximum of 10. It didn't say a minimum. And so because of that, if you give them 1%, it's acceptable.
It's still within the range.
Exactly. So, and it has never crossed 2%. That's why the student loan is always in arrears.
I don't know for a fact whether they have ever reached the 10%, but we will find out and make sure that because of the present large intake of students to the tertiary institutions, they make sure that they give up to and not maybe more than 5% or up to the 10% that the law says they must do. Or in future, we would have to pin them down and make sure that we change the law to make it specific 10% for the fund.
Thank you. So viewers and listeners, this is the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences Forum on Reducing Barriers to Access to Education in Ghana. We just heard from our fourth and final speaker, who's the chairman of the Education Committee in Parliament. We have 20 minutes for an open forum. And before I take comments, I just wanted to ask a couple of quick questions. Honorable Michael Nsoa, your presentation gave us a very nice historical progression of where we've come from. Okay, and because it was 10 minutes, I didn't allow you to delve into it and finish. But I noticed that Ms. Lanyo and Kofi introduced some very important barriers that still exist. The gender barrier, and the spatial rural-urban barrier, and then of course the financial barrier. And then Kofi also spoke about the lack of congruity in schools, where you have some primary schools with no secondary schools and all of that. What's your quick comment on government's thinking in dealing with the gender issue specifically, and also the rural-urban issue? Any quick comments on that?
Okay, first of all, the gender issues, a lot of work has been done with the support of UNICEF, for example. And right now, in many of the primary schools or the lower level of education, there are more girls than boys because of the work that has been done. So that's, and of course, the provision of those facilities are ongoing. They are ongoing, as far as I know, they are ongoing. Certainly, we haven't covered the whole country, but this is the way we are going. Kofi, I like your presentation. The issues raised, they are, you see, sometimes you need a balance between what you have. Yes, it's 15% of GDP, but is that enough? When 80%, more than 80% goes to pay salaries. So what is left is woefully inadequate to provide all those. The GET fund issue, sometimes, you see, GET fund was set up to with the funds to support many of these educational issues. So each year, GET fund submits distribution of the fund, the expected fund the expected fund, I'm using the word expected because I work there for as part of the board, and the expected fund almost every year is in arrears. It's in arrears. So when you have a situation where the expected fund is, but on top of that, Care Fund does a distribution formula and present it to Parliament that so much is going for tertiary, secondary, basic, and so on.
Okay.
And when at the end of it all the other statutory payments to like student loan trust and so on, whatever is there. So this formula is always presented to Parliament, but the biggest challenge is that you don't normally have the full complement of
All right.
that differential. So that's where the challenges are.
I have a question, one final question before I open the floor. Basic education in Ghana is free and compulsory and
Compulsory.
but you still see children on the streets at school going hours and of school going age, either begging or selling.
Yeah.
Why can't we get those children to go to school? Is
Well,
it district assemblies that are failing us, or is it the parents who are irresponsible? What can the state do to ensure that every child goes to school, even those whose parents want them to beg and sell?
Yeah, no, it has to be a collaboration between the school and parents, because the school's mandate or begins at 8 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and that's about 4 p.m. The rest of the issues mainly rest with the parents, because if the parents don't see that their children come to school, that will be, of course, teachers will mark the register, but as to where the children are or whether they are selling or not, we need to have the support of parents in this area, because
no, I get it. My question is to maybe Joyce. If there are parents who don't want their children to go to school, for example, you go to traffic lights in Accra and some children are begging, their parents don't believe in education, can we force the children to go to school and prosecute the parents for not sending them? Because school is free now. That's the question.
Yeah, but those begging at the traffic lights, many of these children are not Ghanaians. There are people who have migrated to Ghana and they have decided to live in Ghana by living at the traffic lights and begging. And sometimes very embarrassing, because no child should be on the street. Now that a lot of infrastructure has been provided everywhere, those children, I think we need the law enforcement agencies to get rid of them at the traffic light, because it's creating an embarrassing situation to the people of Ghana, because foreigners will think that in Ghana, children are living on the streets. But that is not the issue.
Right.
It's a bigger issue than, just not forcing them to go to school. They have decided to live on the streets, and it's very embarrassing.
All right, Kofi, any quick comments on that? Honorable Kwabena, any quick comments on that before we open the floor?
Okay, Bernard, I'd like to give a quick comment on the issue of these children on the streets.
Yes.
It has become an issue for even social welfare, who should be responsible for making sure that these kids are out. And even the education service is also part to collaborate. There should be collaboration to make sure that these kids are out of the streets, even if they are foreigners. Granted, they are foreigners. Is that where they're supposed to be every day, collecting money and all that? And there is this phenomenon that is coming up around the Food and Drugs Authority, where you find these young boys, aggressively approaching cars and then trying to clean the windscreen. These boys are boys of about, say, 15 to 18-year-olds. Are they supposed to be there or rather in school? And clearly, they are Ghanaians. Some are Nigerians, though, they are Ghanaians. I think it's high time we come together and look for strategies, bringing interagency collaboration to address this issue. Because it's a shame and it's a menace and issues around the education that we are talking about. Due to the time constraint, we could not articulate most of them. But clearly, for example, somebody was asking of safeguarding. Safeguarding is big. And those of us in the development arena, if you don't institute a safeguarding policy, you cannot work with any community, because there should be safeguarding issues and the way and the strategies to address. Child protection has gone beyond to be replaced by safeguarding. Issues around disability and inclusion. We still have schools who do not accept persons with disability. They just tell them in their faces. What are we doing? Are they not part of the system? Don't they have the right to also access education? So the issues are just many. Now with the policy of the re-entry, girls who are pregnant can go to school, and mothers are to take charge. Teachers, do they have the capacity to help in supporting these girls in the teaching and the learning process? Pregnancy and its attendance issues, sleeping, spitting, weakness, and all those things. So the issues is quite big, and we need to look at it holistically. Some of these things we are talking about it so that government looks at it and then comes out with certain policies with some interagency collaborations to help address some of these issues. And I believe that with the mantra that we are leaving no one behind, issues about disability and inclusion is so big. I couldn't get the time to talk about it, but it's something we have to address.
Let me yield the floor to Professor Techiwa Menu, Emeritus Professor, to set the ball rolling on the open forum. I have also seen a lot of your questions in the chat box. I will read some as well. So, Prof, if you can hear, you have the floor. Please make sure your mic is on, Professor Techiwa Menu. Okay, so my technical team has to give her access so she can hear us, but her voice cannot be heard because she's not been made a participant. She's not been made a panelist. So technical guys, please work on that whilst she comes on, because she's ready to comment. So whilst we are fixing that problem, let me read a few comments. And thank you for your comments. Prospanyavo says, complementary basic education CBE model has been introduced to provide a second chance to children between 8 to 12 years who have missed out the opportunity to acquire basic education. How has the introduction of this model helped in providing access? One of the challenges facing the rollout of this model is non-availability of schools near some of the CBE classes to enable the CBE graduates transition smoothly to join the formal education system. How is government addressing this challenge? So that's a big question that I will leave for whoever will answer. So somebody will comment on CBE from the panel.
Bernard, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. So
yeah, so good evening, Bernard, and good evening to our panelists. And thank you for a very educative presentation. I think that we've been treated to, the historical issues. We've heard about the financial and the non-financial barriers in access to education. And I think that one of the issues that I wanted to start with, in 1998, after living in the US for some time, I returned to Ghana with my children. So the next day we went to town. My youngest child was 13 years. And the first question he asked me as we went into the street was, why are these children not in school? What are they doing on the streets? And they were Ghanaian children. I think that we should accept the fact that many Ghanaian children are not going to school, notwithstanding all these laws and policies that we have made. Because where we were coming from, no child could be in the street during school hours. So the issue of enforcement has to be squarely tackled. I think that the presentations have raised a lot of issues. I was involved in some studies some years back where we found from the Ghana Statistical Service that up to 25% of Ghanaian children do not live with one or both parents. So we keep talking about parents. We imagine that every child is living in a home with parents. And so we are putting obligations on carers or guardians that may not be easy to fulfill. So if the law was really taking its path, it would force whoever has the temporary guardianship of a child to mark up. But I want to know, for instance, I am a lawyer. I haven't seen many cases where parents have been prosecuted for not taking their child to school. Mr. Nsua started with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we know that education is a right in Ghana as globally, at least in the global conventions and treaties that we have signed. And so, and it's not just a right for nothing, especially in this very complex world. We know that education is the gateway to so many things. Just yesterday, we were rejoicing because Twitter was setting up here in Ghana. I don't know whether it's the headquarters or just an office. We've got the African Continental Free Trade Association, which is agreement, which is headquarters here. How are we going to take advantage of all of these opportunities if we are not accessing education? And the statistics that have been presented are dire. I think that we should go beyond the gross enrollment rates to also looking, as Joyce insisted, the issue of access, retention, and completion. And here we did not talk a lot about quality. We were really talking about access, but the issues of quality, I think they are beyond this forum and we need to deal with it. So one of the non-financial barriers that I want to raise is an issue that, one of the issues that provoked this forum, and that is the issue of the non-financial barriers in terms of beliefs and practices. In the last few months, we have all been watching and listening to the issue of some children, some young people who have not been admitted to their schools because of the ways in which they choose to wear their hair. Other issues have come up about other schools where Muslim students are subjected to various beliefs. And it is important that going forward, we have clear policies on this, because if we don't, then we cannot fulfill the Universal Declaration on Human Rights in guaranteeing that every child has access. Thank you, Bernard. I think I'll stop here because we don't have too much time.
I love your presentation. I wish you would have gone. you were hitting things that I was getting excited about. But thank you so much, Prof, for sharing these thoughts.
Oh, okay. So since you're giving me time, I wanted to hear a little more from Honorable Amankwe Siama on how Parliament actually performs its oversight of the educational sector. Because as for the passage of the laws, etc., that is we know about it. But so many issues have been raised, and I think that all the speakers have raised very important issues. And in the case of Mr. Asari, he cataloged them into the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary levels. But the point really is that we are shortchanging ourselves if we don't deal holistically and dispassionately with the issues that have been raised. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Prof. Honorable Isiama, don't answer that question now, but take note of it. Take note of the question. How does Parliament oversight? I'll bring you in to answer later on. Now, those who want to contribute verbally, as in to speak to us, you can raise your hand on the icon. Click the raise hand icon. Then my administrator will allow you to speak. So whilst you are doing that, let me read some comments which have also come through. So there's already a question about complementary basic education model and how this model has helped in providing access. I think Joyce and possibly Mr. Kofi Asari may want to address that. the issue of whether this model is even working at all, because the question I was asking about the non-availability of schools near some of the CBE classes. So we'll leave that. Now, James Ephraim's question has to do with children on the streets, and I think Prof. Techiwamenu has reiterated that point. So if there's any further comments on that, we'll take it. And then Nanaya Ajiman was asking about children with disabilities facing utmost discrimination, where many school heads refuse to accept them, and what is being done to sensitize and equip these heads. Very good question. Somebody raised it, but I think it's still legitimate if there's somebody who wants to comment on it, because of all the dimensions presented, the disability dimension wasn't presented until during the discussion. So Joyce and co, is it that the disability barrier is not that big, or because I gave you only 10 minutes, you couldn't address everything? Yeah. Here's a nice question from Sicho. Is it possible to use containers to build our rural schools if the brick and mortar is expensive? I have seen an international school in Accra use metal containers to build their annex. That's a very interesting question in relation to deprived schools and infrastructure. And I don't know who's going to answer that, but please take note of it. Is there any hand up for a question that I have not seen yet? If there isn't, let me bring in the panelists quickly. So Honorable Isiama, there are a couple of questions for you. How do you do your oversight? Can you address Prof. Techiwamenu's question and some of the other questions?
Yes, I would first go on to the children in the street. The MMDC have bylaws. These bylaws, they have to use the bylaws to make sure that children don't stay on the streets. They should collaborate with the social welfare and question children who are on the street, but they are not acting on this bylaw. It's very sad that this is happening, and all children on the street below or within the school going age must be questioned and further question their parents, and even go to the extent of prosecuting parents who allow their children of school-going age to hawk. So the law is there, but the implementation is another factor. And Parliament also engaged civil society organizations. Dr. Asare was in my office a couple of weeks ago to discuss the way forward as far as education in the basic and tertiary are concerned. These are some of the things that we do. We have a monitoring and evaluation teams. Almost every member of Parliament must monitor activities of education in his or her constituency. We are motivated to do that. This is another area that the Parliament also seek to make sure that education for all is achieved. And again, tracking the use of Parliament also seek to make sure that the monies allocated to education ministry is used judiciously. We go out there, we inspect infrastructure, we go to the classrooms, we make sure that teachers are in the classrooms, we liaise with the district education officers, and we make sure that the supervision is well undertaken in our various constituencies. So in a nutshell, these are some of the things that members of Parliament do, and the committee as well. We also engage the ministry time on to make sure that they brief us of the happenings of the ministry. We make recommendations and suggestions to the ministry as and when we meet during the year.
Thank you. Other panelists, there was a question about complementary basic education and also a question about specific laws to help deal with issues of discrimination on the basis of hairstyle or religion. Any quick comments on that? Kofi?
Bernard, on the CBE issue, it ties within what I mentioned, that there are about, there are many communities without primary schools, without junior high schools. CBE is basically taking care of those who are not enrolled in school, giving them out of classroom education, and then integrating them within the normal formal education system somewhere along the line. And so you find that in most communities, in scattered communities, satellite communities, the nearest school is about 10 kilometers away. And so it's difficult for the CBE graduates to integrate within the formal schooling. So it situates within what I mentioned, that it's time for us to focus more on expanding basic education infrastructure after 3 years of focusing on secondary education infrastructure, which we have done relatively and remarkably well. It's about expanding infrastructure. On infrastructure again, let me indicate that the comment about using metals, containers to improvise for school buildings, there are discussions ongoing. We've had a lot of research into appropriate technologies or cheaper alternatives to building our schools. We know that a 6-unit classroom block now costs in excess of 450,000 Ghana cedis, which is very expensive. If we had cheaper alternatives, that money could have built 2 schools. And so in our recent discussion with the Parliamentary Select Committee on Education, we met with Honorable Esiama, we indicated that we want Parliament to engage the Ministry of Education on the option of partnering CSIR to use their pozzolana cement. The pozzolana cement has capacity to reduce building costs by 20%, and it is produced by CSIR's Building and Road Research Institute. They have been supported by various agencies, including the World Bank, to commercialize the cement. What they need now is more constructive and sustained demand, so that they can make some money and then expand the pozzolana cement. A lot of people are using the cement in Ghana, and so we need to situate the use of this 20% cheaper alternative pozzolana cement within our public procurement system and see how we can have much cheaper infrastructure being built for educational purposes. Then we can have more value for money and efficiency. On parliamentary oversight, Honorable Chair, yes, it is true. But this afternoon, we submitted a petition to the Speaker as part of our work around the Auditor General's report. In the petition, we are asking the Speaker of Parliament to cause the Public Account Committee to ask the institutions that appeared before it a year ago to render account on the 2018 audit report to come back and appraise the committee on its implementation of, 1, the Auditor General's recommendations, and 2, any consequential orders that came from the PAC sitting. Because what happens is that every year the PAC will sit on the Auditor General's report, and then they will come and more or less accede to whatever has been found, and then they go. The next year, they sit on a different report. There is no mechanism to monitor the implementation of the recommendations in the previous year's report. Neither is there any mechanism to also monitor whether the orders of the committee was implemented or not. And so we hope these are ways that we can strengthen the oversight of Parliament beyond just meeting institutions on the PAC.
I want to ask the panelists to hold on. Let me take a few comments. Edem Kosi, your hand is up. Can we allow Edem to make a comment or ask a question? Edem, if you are there, put on your mic and speak. Edem Kosi. Edem, are you there?
He's unmuted now.
Hello.
Yes, Edem, go ahead.
Yeah, just a few seconds to say thank you to everybody and all our resource persons. Just have a very simple question, and any of our resource persons can take it. Could they speak to what percentage of our GDP we spend on education, and what direction they expect that to go in the coming years. Because evidently, most of the things we are talking about will go back to funding and how much we're investing behind it. Thanks.
All right, we'll take note of that question. Let me take Joshua Ayayi. Joshua, your hand is up. If your mic is there, put it on. And Joshua, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then thank you to all the panelists for their swift presentations. I want to ask, what's the problem with piloting, or what we call the minimum viable product model of approaching a solution? It seems that when we are in the private sector, this is what we do. We do that, we get a proof of concept, and then we scale up. But when it comes to the public sector, it is lacking. Meanwhile, these are the same people who get recommended and then are appointed in the public sector. So why is it not? Because assuming that we had piloted free SHS in, let's say, at least one school in every region, then we would have known the X number of teachers needed, the number of skills they needed to manage the influx of the students that were coming in, and would have known even how to even set a benchmark. Oh, when they, after they wrote their final exam, all of them got, let's say, at least 80%. So when you are scaling it up to a national level, you are, okay, plus or minus. So let's peg it as 70%. So anybody who gains an improvement but does not meet that 70% has failed.
All right, thank you for your question.
Why don't we pilot?
Thank you. It's a good question. I'll direct that question to Mr. Nsoa when the answer time comes. Let me take a question from Jeffrey. Jeffrey, good morning. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Bernard, can you hear me?
Yes, you are on. Jeffrey Okansi.
Yeah. Bernard, directly on the issue of enforcement, I have listened to most of the presenters, and I want us to be very specific that the municipal authorities should use the municipal guards, so that on the streets and in the markets, these are the two major places you will find these children. During the hours of school going, that is between 8 and 2 p.m., we should have the municipal authorities having these guards to be in the markets and on the streets where they are already directing traffic and taking taxes already, to make sure that no child is in that market or on the street doing business or doing whatever. Now, the traditional authorities can also play a role. The recognized groups like the market unions should come on board. The GPRT should also come on board. Then the concerned parent. You remember just yesterday, you and I, when we were working anywhere in this country. So as long as it's a school going period, any parent at all could call you to make sure that you are back into the classroom. They could hold your hands and take you back to the school. We should start such campaigns. Then the next area is about financial irregularities. One of the major barriers is financial irregularities. In the face of all these inadequacies, sardonically, there is stiffly going on. When you go to the Auditor General's report, we lost 23 million Ghana cedis. Better, that tells you that if you even take 15 million Ghana cedis of this amount, by what Kofi just told us, if even one unit 6 classroom block would be 500,000 cedis, as I scale it up, you would have lost 30 of such. So just in a year, we could have gotten 36 unit classrooms. So what can we do? We have to do prevention. And then next thing, like Kofi said, recovery. We shouldn't just come and listen to them at the Public Accounts Committee and then go to sleep. Recovery should be smart. Look, if Bernard, somebody stole your money from your pharmacy during accounting, you will not let the person go back and sit at the desk. What do you see? These people who have taken advantage of these monies, you will go to their offices, they are still at their desk. Not even to talk about recovery. When these things happen, you are actually encouraging and motivating offenders. Now, finally, I think stiffer punitive measures should be put in place. Let us see people being jailed for taking advantage of our monies. Let us see people being punished, their positions withdrawn from them, totally sacked from the service. Let us see people punished well. Thank you.
Thank you. We need to be reminded that we initially had planned to close at 6:30, but looking at the discussion, we will probably end at 7, and we have 20 minutes to go. So we want to urge those of you who are commenting to be considerate in your comments and time conscious so we can take other comments. Let me take 2 more comments. I have Abdullah, and I've seen Charles Ahetuchaga, a former Director General. So even though Charles hasn't raised his hand, I've raised his hand for him. So sound, so he's going to talk by force. But let me take Abdullah.
Oh, no, he has raised his hand. His hand is up.
Okay, I didn't see. Thank you. So thank you. Let me take Abdullah first, and Charles will talk. Abdullah, are you there? Okay. Abdullah, can you hear me? Okay, since Abdullah can't connect, let me take Mr. Aitochaga. You are on.
Yeah, hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Is this Charles or Abdullah?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Charles, it's Charles.
This is
We can hear you.
Charles, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for putting this together. For me, I have two issues that I want to draw attention to, which for me are very critical in the issues of access. One is perception of education, and the second one, which Jeffrey tried to raise, is corruption. In fact, I'm very surprised that Kofi did not say boldly and use the word corruption as a critical barrier to education in this country. And it's important for us to begin to look at it. I mean, when it comes to perception of education, there is a very low perception of the ability of education to really give people a future. Even though we talk about it in so many different ways and attempt to raise dust around it. People are disillusioned. Education doesn't give results. Education is slow. Education is all of that. And we saw the evidence at Kaswa. How 16-year-old boys who are students could go to the extent of looking for money. It just raises issues about the kind of education we are running, which is certainly without hope. And the corruption factor everywhere. Kofi's group has already talked about 23 million lost. Now, even in access to secondary school, people have to pay through their nose. Even today, we are talking about free SHS. People are giving bribes from different angles to get their children in certain schools. People are denied because they don't have money to pay. So these are the things we should begin to stiffly fight and ensure that we have dealt with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. Let me try a final comment from Abdullah if he's there before I read a few other messages. Abdullah, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I had two things to talk about. I remember one of the panels was talking about the Pozzolana cement, and that when we use that one, we can be able to save about 20% of the cost of the building. Are we producing that Pozzolana cement in the country as of now? I know because it says CSIR do the composition of that material in the system. I don't know because, you know, when you're about to set up a factory like that, it's very expensive. But the other thing that I think we should look at is is to complain about the fact that we have issues about one cost of a unit, six classroom block. We need to look at the award at the Ghana Education Service properly. In fact, when some of us pick the documents or contract documents that are awarded to people within the frame, it's so mind-boggling that sometimes one award of contract can do about twice that unit classroom block, even in the hinterland. So some people, we should get the analysis to move into the education system, especially when awards of contract are given to such unit school, because without the physical edifices, what we are talking about will be hindered, and that has to be looked at too. Every part of the country, when the awards are given, we should have some factors like maybe 3, 4, 5%, 7%, depending on the availability of even the raw material within those sectors. But if you have about 25%, 30% variance in contracts, which are spanning from Kumasi to the Brong-Ahafo region to the northern region, we need to look at it carefully. That's my submission.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read a few questions and comments, and then I'll give each panelist a minute or two to pick and choose what they want to react to, since we don't have a lot of time. But I want to thank all of you for your comments and your questions. I'll start with the general comments. Samuel Nate says, the problem is true and poor system we have. I came to Germany in 1989, and with O-level certificate, that was not recognized. So I had to write something which is equivalent to common entrance. And I was able to pass and did an apprenticeship, which has made me work for more than 26 years without unemployment. So you see, is it book that can make you? I think that's what you're trying to say. Or it is book that can make you. Nane Ekuya Owusu says, the poor toilet facilities in schools affect children's learning. I know children who could never use the school's bathroom till they got home. This definitely creates a barrier for many children. Nanekuya, she also goes on to say, thank you very much for your information, Kofi. You really touched on the real issues creating barriers to education. Alex Ampabing says, quality-wise, there's a huge disparity between the townsfolk and our rural dwellers. In my hometown in Sefi Benchema, at Dwaboso, you will be surprised that kids at SHS have never seen or used computers before. Sadly, they will write ICT exams with the rest of the country. Is the interest only about being part or developing our human capital? So that's question 1 from Alex. Question 2, teenage pregnancy is also so rampant in the villages, of which lots of teachers are responsible. How do we engage parents in these communities not to see a teacher impregnating their daughter as normal, but child's rights are protected? Very important. And Alex, City News did a report on teenage pregnancy in a district in Accra. It's not even Benchemao. Somewhere in Greater Accra, not far from Tema, they held a whole program on teenage pregnancy going up. So it's a major issue. Thank you for raising it. May also has a question. How does government plan on funding education in the light of the structural challenges? Almost 90% of education spend is on compensation. Second point, in the face of weak revenue base from government. So Nay's question is about the skew of the funding towards just remuneration. Little money is spent on infrastructure and innovation. Boaz Wuraku says, Honorable Isiama, you have indicated that the allocation by government to education is 12 to 15% of GDP or total annual budget. Is there funding to establish junior high schools or primary schools? That's the question Boaz is asking. Here's one from Harris. The issue of punitive action against parents who still don't send their children to school should be the way to go. But I'm of the view that to break barriers to access, especially in rural communities, the issue of teacher accommodation should be addressed. You go to some communities with schools without teachers, or that teachers are only seen twice a week. Let me just read a few other comments on the Q&A platform. Kwesi Nimo wants to know from the chair of the select committee what he makes of Kofi's recommendation of having basic schools comprehensive from KG to JHS across the country, and especially in deprived communities. Thank you, Kwesi, for that question. Ajay Bekwe says, with the issue of concerning student loan trust fund, as I'm talking to you now, SLTF still owes beneficiaries from 2019-2020 academic year to this one. Some students have been sacked from lecture halls, and some too were prevented from taking ongoing end of semester exams. The unfortunate thing is some couldn't bear the heat, so they are deferred. Bernard, I am a victim. I will urge the Honorable MP to take this matter up because most of us are going through a lot. Let me read one final comment and I'll pick the answers. George Chumesi says, with the virtual digital ring, which the government has already invested in, would it consider digitally powered mobile access technologies and virtual edutech infrastructure to teach children in rural Ghana? That's a big one. Thank you for all your comments. We have 10 minutes and we can't address all, but we'll try. So I'm going to start with Michael Nsoa. I've read so many questions. I want you to pick one or two that you feel strongly about and address in addition to your closing comments. And you are doing all of that in 2 minutes. Good luck to you.
That's very difficult. Anyway, it's all about financing education in the country. Some of the questions. Of course, the questioner indicated that, yeah, he agrees we have very little left after the payment of emoluments. But you see, in a developing country like Ghana, we also need to understand that we do a budget, that's an estimate. In the final analysis, we don't get the quantum of money that is expected because of certain challenges in the collection of revenue. So these are things that we need to look at and reprioritize. Those of us in the industry are asked to reprioritize because the projection sometimes shows that you are not going to get all that you have asked for, and therefore you need to reprioritize. And reprioritizing, that is where sometimes it becomes a big challenge for the implementers, because you have already committed to do ABC in 1 or 2 villages. And then now you go back to say that you have reprioritized, and therefore you're not going to. It sometimes have some, a challenge that you as a public servant, sometimes you are caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, because once the expectation in the community is that you are going to give them ABC, and because of the shortage of funds that you've been made aware, trying to convince them and that you cannot do all 3 or 2, sometimes puts you in a very, very bad, state. So we want communities to sometimes appreciate that it is not always the case that you get everything that you ask for, but
all
so
right.
that.
Thank you. Kofi, your final comments and reaction to questions that were addressed to you. 2 minutes.
First of all, Pozzolana was developed by BRRI over 10 years ago. And so I know estates, some even private estates who are currently using, who have been using Pozzolana since 2014. So it is not actually a laboratory concept. It has been commercialized. Second is that, yes, I believe that we one of the ways to maximize our resources in respect of infrastructure development will be to look for more efficient ways of procuring school contracts. Schools built by CSOs for 300,000, are going for 500,000, by various government agencies. And so we need to standardize infrastructural procurement in this country and ensure that as we navigate our economies within the COVID pandemic, and we go through the budget cuts that COVID has brought to our economies, we, as much as possible, are efficient in using the little that we have to the benefit of the rural population. Finally, it is true that our system is not inclusive enough, and children, for instance, who have cerebral palsy still struggle to get schools to attend. On paper, they are supposed to be integrated within the GES system, but in reality, they are rejected by the schools, and they have to pay to attend private, schools for special needs before they are able to access education. So that is one area we need to take a second look at if we really want to be much inclusive and ensure that every child in Ghana gets on the boat.
Thank you, Kofi Asare. Joyce Lanyo, you have the floor. 2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bernard. I am still looking at issues around the girls' education and the need to step up our game to make sure that the policies that we are putting in place in relation to re-entry of our teenage girls is enhanced. The girls' education unit is retooled, guidance and counseling, school health, all those units within the school system are empowered to be able to handle some of these issues that we are talking about. And finally, issues around disability and inclusion is an issue. It's an issue. Like Kofi said, if you have a child with disability, unless the assessment says that he cannot cope with the teaching and learning process in the schools and that you have to take them to special schools, it's not integrated. So we have to look at all this. Right? Currently, most of the schools are not even disability friendly in terms of assessing the school building. All the teaching and learning materials that are being used, majority of them are not in the accessible formats so that those with issues around the eyes or other issues will actually assess the learning process. So it's a lot of issues within the education sector. And like Ms. Nsoa said, the budget constraints is also an issue which is affecting the development of all these areas that we are talking about. But we will plead that there should be some level of priority in addressing issues of barriers that impede education access in Ghana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, let's take the closing remarks of Chairman of the Education Select Committee, Honorable Isiama. Honorable Isiama, your mic is off. I don't know if you are there.
Hello. Hello,
Yes.
Bernard.
Yes, you are there.
Yes, I've taken notice of many of the questions that were asked, and I'm very sure the committee will take a recognition of some of these questions and act on them. I would like to state that the non-formal education must do a lot to mop up the children and the youth and the aged who couldn't obtain formal education, and act upon them. The government should endeavor to invest in the non-formal education. I think it's another way to include all and give access to those who did not have the opportunity to join the formal education. And one more thing that I would like to speak about is the iBox innovation, the provision of internet access to the rural schools in a COVID-ridden situation like what we are encountering now, so that the rural folks can also join in the iBox innovation and get themselves abreast with technology and help them to also. Something that I would so encourage the ministry to add them to, and make sure that they supervise, especially the rural schools, and make sure that teachers that are overstaffed in the urban areas will be moved to the rural areas to augment the little that we have, to make sure that children in the rural areas also have a taste of good education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've been listening to Honorable Amankwe Isiama, Member of Parliament and Chair of the Select Committee on Education, Honorable Michael Nsoa, former DG of GES and Chairman of the Board of the Education Service, Ms. Joyce Lanyo, Chairman, CSO Platform SDG 4, Kofi Asari, Executive Director, Africa Education Watch, the lead discussant, Professor Emeritus Techiwa Menu, made some fantastic points as well. My job is to give a moderated summary of issues and recommendations, but that's too much to do in too little time. So luckily, the whole program was recorded and we've also taken many notes. So we'll work together with the academy team to put something together and share before our next forum. So I'm going to revert to Emeritus Professor Sefa Dede to give us a closing remarks. And this group that we've started with all of you on Zoom and Facebook will become our core team. We'll let you know the key issues we pulled out of today's program and let you know when the next edition is coming on, so we know we are not just speaking to the air. So Prof. Sefa Dede, if you agree to that, then I'm going to yield the floor to you for your closing remarks, because the program has been too broad, too much depth, and we can't do justice to a summary in a very short time. So you have the floor, Prof.
Yes, Bernard, thank you very much for this very exciting forum, a very special program, a collaboration between the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences and City FM and the City Group. Indeed, the Academy is poised to bring out such issues in a forums like this, that we start a national discourse on critical factors that we all need to hear about, discuss, and come to conclusions on. I take your already accepted suggestion that this is work in progress, and we will come back to the matters arising at the appropriate time. Indeed, the Academy will be happy to collaborate with you on the matters arising. Thank you.
Thank you. And if sharing a platform with emeritus professors will enhance my academic profile, then today I'm blessed because I had 3 professors: Emerita Professor Techiwa Menu, Emeritus Professor Samuel Sefadede, and Professor Paul Bua Basua. Prof, thank you so much. We're so excited. We will put a recorded version of this on our social media for the rest of the public to follow. We'll play samples of this in our news as well. But we really hope the next level of this will come very soon so we don't forget the exciting things we discussed. So on behalf of City and on behalf of the academy, the technical team, the executive secretary, and all of those who work behind the scenes, Mr. Lecture, and all the others, we want to say thank you for being part of this maiden edition of this series. We hope to see you next time. My name is Bernard Avile. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you,
Thank you.
CTFM.